Hi class, Jolene here. We're going to learn the basics of Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator, starting with gaining an understanding of the workspace. So you can see here I've got Illustrator already open, and we're going to create a new document so that will allow us to see our toolbars and control panel, etc. So we're going to start right here under File and New, and then we'll select the default choice here for the size we want. So this is for print 8.5 by 11, and you see that same information reflected over here. We can also choose the number of artboards we want. We're going to start with just one artboard, but as you'll see in other projects we do, we'll create multiple artboards right at the beginning of a project. Won't worry about color mode or bleeds at the time. We'll just start here, and then we'll click on Create. As you can see, we can now see the toolbar, which is right here. We can also see the control panel right here. And we can also see thumbnails of different palettes that we'll be exploring a little bit later and that you'll use quite often. So here's our toolbar, and as you can see, this is a floating panel. Right now it's not floating, it's docked, but if I click and drag it, it becomes a floating panel. And you can see I can move it around to whatever is comfortable for me. Normally when I'm working, I always have it docked right here, and the way you dock it is drag it back to where you want it, and then when you see that blue line, you know that it's ready to be docked and you can just let go. Let's explore those tools a little bit more. First of all, you'll notice that some of them have a little triangle in the right-hand corner. What that's telling you is that there are more tools hidden below that one. So if you click and hold on it, it'll show you what other tools are below it. If right now I can, the direct selection tool is the one that's activated, but if I put my cursor on this one, now that's the one that's activated. I'll go back to the direct selection tool. Here on the rectangle tool, again, is another one with multiple other tools underneath it. We have the rectangle tool, rounded rectangle tool, ellipse, etc. And I'm going to be showing you how those work in a moment. So once I let go, it just springs back and I can switch back to the rectangle tool. Also, the other thing to notice is that whenever you hover over any of the tools, it not only tells you what that tool is, in this case it's the lasso tool, but it also shows you in parentheses what the keyboard shortcut is. So for the lasso tool, it's the letter Q. You type the letter Q and the lasso tool will be activated. Let me try that. So now you can see over here that that is the active tool, the lasso tool. If I click on the selection tool here, you can see that black arrow is what is active here. Now the ribbon over on this side, on what's on the right side on my workspace, which by the way is governed by which selection I've made right here. I'm using the Essentials workspace, so you can see that's the one that's checked right here. You can customize this so that every time you open Illustrator, the tools that you most likely use will be there for you. So I'm using Essentials right now. It may not look exactly the way yours does because I may have already moved things around, but I've got the essential tools here right now. These are also called panels, and these panels note if I click on it, it pops out, or it's considered a fly out, a pop out or a fly out. So you can see here, this is the character palette. This is where I would choose which font I want to use. You can see there's multiple things that I can do here. I can click on this little down arrow and it shows me all the different fonts that are available to me. Right next to that, nested within the character panel, is the paragraph panel. So if you're creating copy that's more than just like a word or a sentence or a headline, you'll want to use the paragraph panel. When you're finished with it, you just click this arrow and it puts it back for you. But if you want to keep this, for instance, this character panel out, again, you can click and drag on it, drag it, and now it's out and available to you, and it's nice and easy. So if you're working with a lot of type and you want to have it out all the time, that's how you do it, is just click and drag it out. Now, if I want to put it back, I just click over here, and when I see that blue line appear, I let go, and now there's my character panel that I can slide out or slide back in. The other thing to notice about this panel and most other panels is that there's this little, some people call it a hamburger, which is an extra menu that gives you even more options for this panel. So I can click on show options, and now those extra options are already available to me. I'll slide that one back in, and now we'll talk about the control panel, which is right up here. And the information that's in the control panel is governed by which tool you're using. So right now we've got the selection tool chosen, so these are choices for that. But if I click on the pen tool, notice what the shortcut for the pen tool is. It's the letter P. If I click there, you might not see anything change here until I actually start using the pen tool. Now you can see that there are different tools up here available to me for the pen tool. All right, let's erase that. Let's get rid of it, I should say. I'm going to go back to the selection tool, and the selection tool does just what it says it does. It selects things. So if I deselect by clicking off this and then click back on it, it's now selected. And I'm just going to click the delete key to get rid of that, because we're going to try something different. We're going to try using the pen tool to make a line. So I'm going to choose the pen tool, and then I'm going to click one time. That's a fundamental thing that's hard for most people to remember when they're using the pen tool. Even if they're making a line, you just click one time. And now I'm going to move over to the right and click again. And now you can see I have a line. Now I just called this a line, but it's also called a stroke. That's a term you're going to want to get used to. You can see right here that when I hover over this outlined box right here, this is the stroke, and this is what governs what color the stroke is when I click on it and it's on top. So for instance, if I change that color and then click off of this, let's get this out of the way by just dragging it, now I have a red stroke. But we'll go back to a black stroke. So you can see when I click here, that brings up this color box panel, and I can change to a black stroke there. But wait, it didn't work. It was because I didn't have it selected. So you can see I've got the selection tool, and now I'm going to change that to a black stroke. Now what if I want to make that stroke smaller? or larger. First of all, I'm going to zoom in here so you can see it better. I'll select my zoom tool. Shortcut is the Z key. And I'm going to just kind of drag across that, close this color panel. So you can see I have the zoom tool showing there. And now I'm going to click on the direct selection tool and click on this path. When you use the pen tool, you create a path, and you can see that there's anchors at each side of it. Those are the anchors that I created when I made this stroke. So if I click on this anchor with the direct select tool, I can now hold and drag that and change how that stroke looks. I can make it smaller or shorter. I can make it longer, but I can't move it with the direct select tool. I need to switch back to the selection tool to move it. Note that when I have that tool selected, it puts a bounding box around it. So now I can move the whole thing as a unit. So that's the difference between the selection tool, the black selection tool, and the direct select tool. When I have that piece of art, that line selected, I can make other choices besides the color of it. I can note that up here in the control panel, I now have some choices, and one of them is how wide I want that stroke to be. So right now it's 1 point. I can either, to increase the size of it, I can either click on this down arrow and let's try 8 points. So we see it's much thicker. Let's see what it looks like when it's 18 points, much, much thicker. You can even go smaller than 1 point. Let's go back to 1 point. Remember how that looks. You can select 3/4 of a point, half a point, or even 1/4 of a point. So you can see now that that's a very thin stroke. There's several ways to change the color of the stroke. First, let's increase the size of the stroke again so it's real easy for us to see. Again, your stroke, everything that has to do with the stroke is done right here. Shouldn't say everything having to do with it, but this is one place where you can change the color of the stroke. You can also change the color from right here. So this is your stroke color. Let's change it to this orangey color, or maybe we want green. That's another place you can, that's the second place you can change the color. Or you can come over here and choose the swatches panel. So that's pretty much the same thing as what we saw over here. So you have different places where you can change the color. This is called the swatches panel. I'll put that back. The other thing I want you to notice here is this controls the stroke, and this box controls the fill. Now, because we don't have a closed shape right now, there's nothing to fill. So I'm just going to turn that off because we don't need it. So I'm going to select none for the fill. Whichever of these two shapes is on top is what is going to control what happens next. So if I try to change the color of this stroke now, notice that nothing happened because I just changed the fill color. So I'm going to turn that, switch that to none again, go back to activating the stroke. Notice that it's on top now. So now if I change the color, it's actually affected. All right, let's close this control panel. And let's take a look at other things we can do with this line. I already mentioned that we can move it using the black arrow, the selection tool. So I'll move it here. But I can also copy it by using the Option or Alt key. Alt on a PC, Option on a Mac. So the trick to copying something is to click and drag. I'm now holding down the Option key, and now I'm going to let go of my mouse. That's the trick, is letting go of your mouse while still holding down the Alt or Option key. All right, I'm going to delete these two lines by clicking and dragging across both of them and then clicking my delete key. And I'm going to make another line. This time I'll make it straight. And note that I made it with the line tool, the line segment tool. That works the same way as the pen tool, but as you're going to see later, the pen tool can do curvy lines also. The line segment tool just does straight lines. So as I mentioned before, the direct select tool allows you to select parts of things or points. So if we again zoom in, I'm tapping the Z key to zoom in so you can see this a little better. You'll see that there, go back to my direct select tool, the white arrow. You'll see that there are anchor points on each side of this line. Both of them are solid little anchor points. See if we can zoom in even more so you can see that point there. I'm going to zoom out now. Too much. Come back. Now, if you click on one of those anchors, you can see that it's solid, and that's the one that's selected, whereas this one over here is hollow, so it's not selected. But watch what happens when I select it. Now it is solid. So you might want to practice with this to see what happens, what the difference is between the white direct select tool and the black selection tool, which allows you to move your object. Give it a try. Play around with the points and the lines. Make multiple lines by copying them, move them around, change the stroke size, change the color. And don't worry about if you mess anything up. You can just go to Edit, Undo, Move, and it puts it back. But the shortcut for that is Command or Control Z. That's probably the most important shortcut on the keyboard. You're going to use it all the time, all the time. Notice the difference between going up here to Edit, Redo, or Undo, Move, and just Command Z, which I'm doing from my keyboard. So you can see if I do multiple Command Zs, it takes me back pretty much as many times as you want to go backwards. So that's Command or Control Z to undo something or some things. Before we get too far down the road here, let's take a look at how to save a file. This is something that you should probably do at the very beginning. Save your file in the appropriate folder with the appropriate name. It's very easy to get started on a project and a half hour later realize that you haven't saved it, and that's a very dangerous proposition. If something crashes, if your electricity goes out, believe me, it's happened to me. Many different things have happened that have caused me and many others to lose my files. So it's a good idea to save your file right away. So here's how you do it. We'll go to File, Save As. Notice that the Save choice is grayed out, and that's because we haven't saved it as anything yet. So we're going to click on Save As, and I've set up a folder here on my desktop called a test folder, and I'll name this Line Exploration. And you'll see here it's asking me what type of file I want to save it as. Do I want to save it in the native Adobe Illustrator format, which ends in .ai, or the other more very common format for Illustrator is a PDF file. These others you will rarely use, so I'm not even going to talk about them. And we'll talk about PDF files later, but right now, which are very similar to Illustrator files. But right now we're going to save it as an Illustrator file. So I've named it Line Exploration, and it's going to be an Illustrator file. And I'll click Save. That brings up this dialog box. And so you can see here it's asking me what version I want to save it in. If you're working with Illustrator CC, you really don't need to do anything except click OK. If you're working with an older version of Illustrator, such as CS6, you can choose CS6. This is called saving it as a legacy version. And what that does is it allows you to open this CS6 file. If you're on a different computer that has CC, it'll allow you to open it. Hopefully, we're all going to be working on the Creative Cloud, which is what CC is, or what it stands for. So we're just going to leave it as the default and click on OK. And now you can see here up on this tab that my file is now called Line Exploration.ai. And then we see an @ sign, and it's showing 400%. That means I'm zoomed in at 400%. If I zoom out, notice how this changes. It's now at 200%. If I zoom out again a couple of more times, I'm now at 100%. So there's that line at 100%. If I make a change, such as changing the color of this stroke, I'll change it to red. Now notice that a little asterisk has appeared right here in my file name. That's telling me that this file has not been saved since a change was made. So remember when I said we could do File, now see the word Save is available because we've already saved it with a name. Look at what the shortcut for that is, Control S. So I'll click there. I'm going to make another change. I'll change the color again using the swatches panel. I'll make it green. And so notice again, there's my asterisk. This time I'm going to, instead of going to File and Save, I'm going to use the shortcut. So watch what happens right here when I click on Control Save. Control S, excuse me. Control S is the shortcut for saving. Notice that the asterisk is gone and it is now saved. All right, now we're going to learn about a technique called nudging. That's moving something by just a little tiny bit, nudging it. So I'm going to use my direct select tool to delete this line, and I'm going to make 2 new lines. So there's my first line. I'm going to click my direct select tool and then click off of it. You can see nothing is selected. And now I'm going to make a copy of this same line by dragging, and remember, holding down the Alt key and then letting go of the mouse makes a copy of whatever I had selected. Now I want to nudge these 2 lines closer together. So I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to put my swatches back so I have a clean artboard. And now I've got this line selected and I'm going to nudge it. And I use the keyboard to nudge it. I use the arrows on the keyboard more specifically to nudge it. So if I click the up arrow, you can see it's nudging by just a little bit at a time. I can nudge to the left, to the right, or to the bottom. So that nudging is done in increments, and how big that or small that increment that incremental nudge is defined by the preferences in Illustrator. So let's take a look at the preferences and let's make a change to how much we nudge by in preferences. So we'll go up here to File. Nope, it's under Edit, and then Preferences right here, and then we'll select General. And right up at the top of the General tab right here is Keyboard Increment, and it's now set at 0.02. So that's how much it's nudging by right now. These were the things that I was nudging. So I'm going to change this to add another 0, which is going to make the nudging even smaller. And then I'll click on OK right here. So make sure I've got this selection now selected, excuse me. Now notice when I nudge it, you can barely see anything happening. It is moving up incrementally, but it's in a much smaller increment. So let's go back and change it, the preferences back to just 0.02. That's the increment that you're most often going to use. But if you have to do some really fine tuning when you're nudging something, and it does happen, it's very easy to just go into your preferences and make that change there, and then say OK. And now look at how the nudging happens, a much bigger increment. By the way, the keyboard shortcut for preferences is Control K. Something you might want to write down. Control K will automatically take you to preferences. Now let's take a look at other ways that you can modify an object. Since we've got a stroke or a line selected, let's make some changes to this line besides just the stroke size or the stroke color. And to do that, we're going to choose the stroke panel, which on my setup is, for my workplace, is right here. So you can see it's an icon with 3 different size strokes. So I'll click there. And again, you can see that I can change the weight of this stroke. I'll change it to a 6. But you can see I can also do other things with this line. I can change how the end or the cap of the line appears. So right now it's just it's called a butt cap. If I change it to this one, it's a round cap. And here is another way of doing it called a projecting cap. So you can see that the cap projects out over the anchor point. I can also change how the corner appears if I had another line here. And I can do other things here. I can make it a dashed stroke. And you can see there's other choices for that. We'll turn that off and make it a regular stroke. Now, before we go to some of the other tools we have available to us, something I want to tell you about what you do if your tool panel disappears. Here's the tool panel. What if you accidentally delete it? Here's where you would delete it. Let's do it. I'm going to do it. Oh my gosh, it's gone. So now there's just hardly anything I can do without having that tool panel. I've got to have a tool panel in order to do anything. So how do you get it back? The way to get it back is to go right here to Window and Tools, right here. And we're going to select Default Tools. So there it is. And notice that it's a floating panel. I'm going to put it back right here. So I'm sliding it all the way to the left side until I see that blue line, and then letting go. And now it's docked. The same thing goes for these panels over here. Say I the character panel went missing. I'll deliberately make it go missing. You see it's not there anymore. Here's where I find it. Here's where you find all the panels. So I'll go here to type and then character. And now I have my character panel back. And I can redock it, and there it is right there. So that's a really important thing to remember. This is where you'll find all your panels. And you can see there's lots of them. You don't want to have them all out at the same time because there's some of them that you may never use, some that you're going to use all the time. Now let's talk about arranging objects. Right now we have these two lines. I'm going to select this one and make it a little bit shorter by dragging it. Notice as I'm dragging, my mouse is kind of wobbly, and I might get something like that, which is not what I want right now. I want a straight line. Whenever you want to keep an object constrained, in this case, constrained meaning I want to keep it straight, as I drag to the right, I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and now my mouse cannot move the line except right or left. I can't go up or down with it. So in other words, that line is constrained. I'll move that right here. And then I'm going to delete this line and create another one of these lines. So remember, the way to do that is to drag it, hold down Alt or Option, and let go of the mouse, and now I have two lines. So now we're going to learn a little bit about stacking order. So I'm going to make one more of these lines, holding down Alt or Option and letting go. And now we're going to stack one on top of each other. But before I do that, I'm going to change their colors so that it's more apparent. So we'll make this one pink. We'll make this one, well, look what happened. I just changed the color. You can see it got changed over here. Can you figure out why nothing happened? Well, it was because I didn't have it selected first. So now that I've got it selected and I make it lime green, there we go. Now I'll select this one and I'll make this one blue. Now we're going to stack them on top of each other and figure out how we change the order of how they're stacked. So I'm going to select this one by using the direct select tool and clicking and dragging. And I'll drag it out about like this. So now you see that blue line is behind. Now I'll select this pink one and select that anchor and drag it up. And so now I have the lines stacked one on top of the other. The pink line's on top, the green line's in the middle, and the blue line's on the bottom. Well, now I'm going to switch over to my direct select tool. What if I want the pink line to be in the middle? The way we do that is go to Object, Arrange, Send Backward. Now if I click on Send to Back, it's going to go, we'll try that. It's going to go all the way to the back. It's going to go below the blue line. Watch. There it is. Now, I mentioned I wanted it to be in the middle, so let me go back to Object, Arrange, and I'm going to click on Bring Forward. Not bring to front, but bring forward. And now you can see the pink line is in the middle. Now let's talk about grouping objects. Right now these objects are not grouped. You can see I've got the pink one selected. I can click here and click and select the blue one. I can click here and select the green one. But what if I want all three of these to be one object? The way we do that is to group them. So with the selection tool activated, I'm going to click and drag over all three of them so you can see now they're all selected. And now I'm going to click on Object and Group. Notice the keyboard shortcut. This is one you'll use a lot. Control or Command G will group them. Now when I click on it, they all move together no matter where I click. If I click on anywhere in here, come on now, move. You can see they're all moving as a group. To ungroup them, I go back to Object, Ungroup, and now they're all separate objects. But we've been focusing on using the stroke, which again is activated here, but let's talk about how to fill an object. Right now we can't fill any of these objects because they're just lines. So I'm going to select all of these. I'll make my artboard zoomed out a little bit. I'll move this up, and I'm just going to grab all of these and just move this up in the corner. And now we're going to create an object that can be filled. So we'll start with the rectangle tool. I'll just click once here. I know it's activated because it's solid black there. Come back over to my artboard, and I'm going to click and drag. And now we have a rectangle with a blue stroke on it. And right now we can't really see what color the fill is because we're working on a white artboard, but we know that there's no fill in it because this is what activates the fill, and it has a red line through it, meaning there's no fill. One way we can know that there's no fill is if I move this off the artboard, you can see there's nothing there. I'm going to straddle the outside of the artboard and the artboard, and making sure I have this activated, I'm going to add orange as my fill. So you can see now that this is filled with orange and has a blue stroke. If I want to change that fill to red, I click here. If I want to change the color of the stroke, I need to make sure that the stroke square here is on top, and that makes it active. And now I'll change the color. Let's change it to black so we can see it really well. And I'll move this back onto the artboard. So that's how you fill an object. And any object that has a closed path, which means the anchor points are all touching and they're filled, works that way. Let's just see how it would work if we created an ellipse. So we do it the same way. We choose the ellipse tool, and I'm just going to drag and make an ellipse. Notice that it's the exact same colors because it defaults to whatever you have here. I'll make the stroke blue, switch over to fill, and let's make that purple. So those are geometric shapes that we just made there, but filling an object that was made in an organic way works the same way. Let's choose the pen tool to make an organic shape, and we're going to be learning a lot more about the pen tool later. But remember what we said right at the beginning, that when you use the pen tool, you click once and then click and drag. And notice if I pull and drag, that's what controls how much curve is in my shape. If I come back around and meet that anchor point there, now I have a closed path. And let's just change the colors of the fill and stroke on this one also. We'll make that one a dark blue. A hotkey, what's called a hotkey, that's the Shift or Control or Alt or Command key on your keyboard, which is used in conjunction with other things. The Shift key is really important because it, like I showed you with the line, it keeps whatever your object is constrained. So if I want to make this shape smaller by hovering and then clicking on the corner of this shape, I can do that, but notice what happens if I can move my mouse around and I did not constrain it. I'm going to do Control C to put it back the way it was and show you what happens when I hold down the Shift key and then grab the corner. Now that shape is constrained. It's going to be made smaller or larger proportionately. Same thing with this rectangle, larger or smaller proportionately. Now we're going to take a look at the type tool. This is going to be the last tool we're going to see on this video tutorial. So I'm going to select all of these shapes and delete them, and we're going to switch over to the type tool. I'll put my swatches away and go over to my type tool over on my tool panel and click on that. So you can see now my cursor has changed. And if I click one time, Illustrator automatically puts in what's called lorem ipsum, or Greek letters, to get you started. If I click here and then make this bigger so you can see it, that's what that looks like. So I'll just move that here. So that's not what I typed, that's just what Illustrator puts in. Now if I double click on that and select it, I can type in what I want. I'll type in type tool. Oh, that's very difficult to read, and that's because it's a fancy font that I have chosen. So I'm going to go back to my selection tool and change that. One place I can change it is right here in this character panel up here from what's called Mr. Leopold. I'll change it to a more standard font that's easier for us to see, such as Arial. Now that's a lot easier to see. So let's try that again. The type tool, click, and it automatically defaults to a small font. In this case, it's a 12-point font. But I can change that right here to, let's say, 36 points. So you can see this is one of the places where I can make changes to the type of character it is, the font. I can change, in the case of Arial, which has multiple styles within the font, I can make it narrow, I could make it bold, italic. Not all fonts have those choices, but Arial is one that does. And you could tell that it does because it has this drop-down arrow right here. And then if I use my black arrow, I can move that type around to wherever I want. So that concludes this tutorial. It roughly follows the order of pages 9 through 26 in the Adobe CC Design Basics PDF document that you downloaded at the beginning of the class. So you can look back at the words that go with this tutorial that might help you out. Two different ways of learning there.